Welcome to the realm of magic and mystery, classic horror and sci-fi. You are now entering the House of the Unusual podcast with your hosts, Eddie and Joe. Welcome all you cool ghouls and friendly fiends to the House of the Unusual podcast. I'm your host, Joe Pavlansky. With me as always is the maestro of mail order mysteries, Eddie Guevara. Today's guests are the one and only Chuck Caputo and Craig Tarbeck. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you.
All right, glad to be here.
All right, guys, before we get into our conversation, as always, we're going to talk a little bit about some friends of the House of the Unusual. We're going to start off with our buddy Todd Machin over at the Sea Monkey store. So go ahead and visit sea-monkeys.com for all your underwater sea monkeys needs. They have some great stuff there. And if you're into magic and magicians, mentalism, check out our buddy Dave Haversat's website at 1878press.com. That's 1878press.com. And I tell you what, if you're like us and you love stupid stuff that will make you laugh all night long, you got to check out stupidcomicsmagazine.com. And that's stupid spelled STOOPID. And the comics magazine is completely hilarious. It is a mix of the Far Side, Cracked, and Mad magazine all rolled up into one, all black and white pages, and they're absolutely hilarious. So go ahead and check that out at stupidcomicsmagazine.com. And if you're in the mood to watch some videos on some great magic, especially horror magic, check out our buddy Chuck Caputo's YouTube site at Sherry Caputo. Just type it in the search, Sherry, that's Cheri, Caputo, Caputo. Tons of great videos on there. You won't be disappointed, and you'll have a great time. And while you're on YouTube, check out House of the Unusual and subscribe to our channels, like our videos, and come back every week for more. Also, Scary Monsters Magazine, number 123, the Harrowing Haunted Halloween issue, is up for pre-order at mymoviemonsters.com. The magazine is 146 pages of monster kid goodness, and the cover by Scott Jackson is going to be absolutely amazing. It's a glow-in-the-dark cover, and if everything comes out right with the printers and you get that, full of some sunlight and everything and put it in the dark, you're going to get to see some ghouls and ghosts on the cover that you're not able to see in the daylight. So definitely check that out. And also check us out at houseoftheunusual.com. We have a free forum site there where you can meet some like-minded individuals, have some great conversations, and share in your collection. Show us, what you got in your collection. So that's what we got for friends of the podcast today. And it is time for the Crypt of Classics. So every week on the Crypt of Classics, what we do is I give you a movie that you could watch during the week, and then head over to the forum site, and pinned on the top is Crypt of Classics, and you could let us know what you thought about the movie, discuss it, and give us your insight. So if you're wondering what to watch and you've seen everything, don't worry, we got you covered. So this week we have The Old Dark House. So, seeking shelter from a storm, 5 travelers are in for a bizarre and terrifying night when they stumble upon the family estate. The Old Dark House is a 1932 American pre-code comedy horror film released by Universal Pictures, directed by James Whale, and based on the 1927 novel Benighted by John Boyton Priestley. It stars Boris Karloff, Melvin Douglas, Raymond Massey, and Gloria Stewart. The film was released on October 20th, 1932 in the United States, and October 26th, 1932 in the United Kingdom. Considered a lost film, director Curtis Harrington, a close friend of James Whale, discovered a print in the Universal Vaults in 1968. So many thanks to him for going the extra distance to find the print of that. The movie has a runtime of 72 minutes and had an estimated budget of $250,000, which would be $4.4 million in today's money. Video can be found for free on YouTube, or if you have the Shudder app, they have it on there as well. You can go anywhere and find it on DVD. That would probably be your best bet to find a good copy of it. So that is our Cryptic Classics Film of the Week, The Old Dark House from 1932. Great movie if you've never seen it, and if you have seen it, now's the time to revisit again during the Halloween season. And I tell you what, if it's a dark, stormy night outside, this is the movie to put on at your house and turn off all the lights and sit back, relax, and watch it. Won't be disappointed. All right, so that's what we got for today. So we're going to check out our guests, Chuck and Craig, and see what they're up to. Chuck, I'm going to give it over to you and let us know what's going on, man. And thanks for joining us.
Hey, no problem. It's always a pleasure. I'm picking up some feedback here. Let me try and move this around.
Well, Chuck, you got to remember, you're a magician. You got to come in with that strange, type of sound.
How does that sound now? Does it sound better?
Sounds good.
Okay, kind of lower the volume a little bit. Yeah, you know what? I'm keeping busy, guys. I've been doing quite a few shows. I actually had one today. The problem is with this variant coming in now. There's a few of the nursing homes that have canceled because if one person comes down with the coronavirus, it could be like a worker or it could be like a resident. By CDC rules, that's a total lockdown. So some shows are being postponed actually because of the variant, that's coming around, and with kids going back to school now, they're actually bringing it home. They're actually spreading it and everything. So that's unfortunate. So I hope this doesn't pick up to where it was before, man. But you know what? I'm still doing quite a few shows, but some are being postponed. So that has been happening the last couple of weeks, I noticed.
And as a magician, Chuck, aren't you able to make it disappear?
Hey, I wish I could, man.
Yeah, come on, Chuck. Where's your magic powers, man? Let's do it.
What's going on here? Now, if you guys know, we have in the background here Mr. Craig Tarbeck. Craig Tarbeck has been, to all our listeners out there, if you ever grew up and read a comic book and you saw an ad for the Johnson Smith Company, it was Craig who put it together.
Wow.
So we're going to ask Craig to give us a little bit of his background, and this way most listeners out there can get to know him. Go ahead, Craig. The floor is yours.
Well, it's not that exciting, but I came on board to Johnson Smith Company in 1970, and they were pretty small then. The owner had let the company kind of just dwindle down, but we when I came on board, we decided to try to build it up. And the comic magazines, the ads in the comic magazines were really something that worked very well for us. And by the way, you may not know this, but the very first comic was the Superman Action Comics of 1938. And Johnson Smith had 2 full-page ads in that comic book, which if you could get a copy of now would be worth many dollars. But in 1970, I started doing the comic ads, which many people are familiar with, 50, 60 items on one page. It was in those days, in the 60s and 70s, 100 million comic books would go out every month. And that lasted into the 80s when, for some reason, comics, the comics of the 50s, 60s, and 70s just dwindled down to a fraction of what they were earlier.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, Craig, we had talked about a story. I know you used to sell duplicates of the 1929 Johnson Smith catalog, which supposedly was the largest catalog ever made at the time. You told me a little bit of story. Can you tell our audience that story?
Yeah, sure. Let's go back in the history of Johnson Smith. Alfred Johnson Smith came to America from Australia. He had sold rubber stamps in Australia by mail, and he grew to like the mail order business. But Australia was a pretty small country at that time in the early 1900s. So he decided to come to America and start a mail order business here. And he landed in Chicago. Why there? Because that's where Montgomery Ward's and Sears and Roebuck were located, both giant mail order companies of the day. And so Mr. Smith thought that's where he should be, Chicago. But he knew that he couldn't compete with Sears and Ward's because they sold everything that you needed or wanted. So he decided to sell things that people didn't really need, and he did novelties. Eventually, the catalog grew into 600-700 pages. Mr. Smith really fancied himself a writer, and he liked to write the ads in the catalog. He'd spend 2 pages describing a 10-cent item. The 1929 catalog was reprinted by a publishing house in 1970, actually, about when I started at Johnson Smith, and it's interesting history of that catalog too. In 29, when Mr. Smith published the catalog, he wanted to sell it for 3 cents a copy. Now you're talking a 600-700 page volume that he was trying to sell for 3 cents. However, this was the time of the Depression, and the catalog did not sell. So he was stuck with all these copies of this giant catalog that he couldn't distribute, and he also couldn't pay the printer. As a result, the company went bankrupt, and Mr. Smith told the printer, "I will pay you eventually. What can we work out?" So the printing company, I believe, was called Western Printing, which I think is still around. They were located in Racine, Wisconsin. So they told Mr. Smith, relocate here to Racine so we can watch you and help you. And as you get your business going again, pay us back. So eventually, he did move to Racine and eventually paid back all the money he owed the printer and all of the money that he owed any vendor of his, any supplier, because he had, thousands of items in the catalog that he had purchased and couldn't pay for. But eventually, he was able to get the business going. He wound up paying 100% rather than 10%, which the bankruptcy law allowed. He paid everybody back 100%. And from there, in the 30s and 40s, the business took off. And when I came on board in 1970, I would go and to the trade shows where I would meet the vendors who had supplied Johnson Smith for many years. And they loved Johnson Smith because he had paid everybody 100%. So they never had problems getting any merchandise that we needed. Eddie, you have a copy, I believe, of that 1929 reprint, don't you?
No, I have a copy of the reprint, but I also have the actual real catalog.
Yeah, so you have both. You have the original and you have the reprint.
Wow.
There's a foreword in the reprint written by a fellow by the name of Gene Shepard, who in the day, in the 60s and 70s, was pretty much a cultural. He was sort of. I'm trying to think of like who he was. in today would remember. Anyway, he was very well known, and I love one of the lines that he wrote in the foreword. What he said about the Johnson Smith catalog was that it was the Rosetta Stone of American culture. In other words, if you wanted to find out what it was like in the 20s and 30s and 40s in America, take a look at what Johnson Smith sold in their catalog. Some of the stuff, by the way, that was in that 1929 catalog would have gotten Mr. Smith in a lot of trouble today. There was some racial stuff. I don't think he was racist, but in the 20s, I mean, people looked at African Americans in a different way than we do today. And so there was some stuff that definitely wouldn't fly in today's world in that catalog, but it was what America was like. So the 29 catalog is really a piece of American cultural history, and I'm glad you have a copy of it, Eddie.
Yeah, I tell you what, I got a copy of it too, Craig. Hey, yeah, hey, but first of all, man, it's it's a pleasure to finally talk to you. I'll tell you what, I grew up in the '70s, like the early to mid '70s, and right. Man, those ads bring back memories, Craig. I'll tell you what, you did a fantastic job, you and Johnson Smith. I placed my first order in 1969 when I was 5 years old. I bought it. Yeah, that's what actually got me into doing magic. I mean, I was a 5-year-old kid. I bought a ball vase and a color changing handkerchief. And
so your first purchases were magic?
Yeah. The first purchase.
You knew at age 5 that you were a magician.
Yeah, I did. You know what? And I sent the money in. I think my mom made a money order at the bank, and it was like the whole thing was like $1, maybe like $1.60 or something. The whole order came to, and it took 2 weeks to come. For some reason, because I placed a lot of orders throughout the years when I was a kid. You know what? It always took around that time where I lived anyway. It took 2 weeks, and so I was so excited. That was the longest 2 weeks I ever had. And but I'll tell you what,
early days, people like you actually sent in cash, or coins. Right.
Yeah.
And people would tape their coins to 3x5 cards, and we'd get 75 cents in the mail, all pennies or what have you. We had to have people sitting at tables and opening the mail and separating out the coins and the dollars and so forth. Stuff back then was not. I mean, it was $1 here and 25 cents there, and not that way any longer, of course. But
no, and I saved a lot of that stuff, Craig. You know what? Like, I have about 3 drawers full of stuff that I saved throughout all the years that I bought things, and I finally put it into one cabinet that I built. Like it has swinging doors, and I like put different racks in there and stuff. So I actually have it all put into one thing because, like, my wife was getting disgusted. We've been married. Yeah, we've been married close to 30 years, and she said, "Why don't you get all that stuff and put it somewhere?" And so I did. I finally built a cabinet, and it's like a display type of thing, and then still to this day, like when I do lectures, for like different magicians, I'll bring this along because we all grew up with that stuff. It's fascinating. So I'll get each item out and explain what it does and so forth. It's just really, really cool stuff, man.
And you might be interested to know that other famous people got into magic or entertainment as well by starting with Johnson Smith stuff. For instance, Johnny Carson.
Okay.
Johnny Carson bought when he was a youngster in Iowa, I think it was, bought his first magic from us, Johnson Smith.
Wow.
And he became the Great Carsoni.
Yeah, that's right, the Great Carsoni. Yep.
As a 12-year-old or so, and he would do birthday parties for the 5 and 6-year-old kids. But that's where he first got a taste of entertaining and making people laugh.
Mhm.
and which is why, and he had often said Johnson Smith ads and merchandise was the reason he became an entertainer.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's a lot like your story.
Yeah, that's
Now
fantastic.
he ended up with a couple $100 million, so maybe that's in your future.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, but I tell you what, yeah, I used to like to watch the Carson show. I used to always watch it because he was very friendly to like the magicians. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that he was a magician, like you said. I mean, he had a lot of magicians on there throughout the years. I used to get a kick out of his show, man. And he had a lot of the top entertainers. I kind of like his late show like a lot better than the ones today.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think you're right. Do you remember Orson Bean?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, Orson Bean, an actor, would come on Carson, and Bean would bring a bag full of jokes and novelties, like the stuff Johnson Smith sold, and they would actually mention Johnson Smith. I remember one night I happened to catch Bean and Carson talking about Johnson Smith and showing some of the gags and
Oh,
jokes, and I thought, well, gee, the phone's going to ring off the hook tomorrow morning,
uh-huh.
but it didn't.
Wow, that's actually kind of cool. Maybe there's a video clip somewhere on YouTube if we search this, Orson
Yeah,
Bean.
it might be something to look for.
Yeah, I tell you what, I used to stay up to watch the Carson show even when I was in high school. I
Uh-huh.
would look out for a few people. One was Don Rickles.
Right.
That guy was hilarious. You know what? If he was on the Carson show, I'd stay up and watch it. Like even on the school night, I used to stay up for him, Rodney Dangerfield, and Rip Taylor. Rip
Yeah.
Taylor was hilarious. Oh man! But those three comedians were the best.
They don't make them like that anymore.
No, they don't. They don't.
You don't see that stuff like you saw with on the Carson show.
No, you don't.
You
Yeah.
don't, and something interesting too, that a lot of people don't. Goes back to 1985. At the time, I wanted to know how to get the ghost and how to make it. So I decided to call Johnson Smith. When I called Johnson Smith, they put on the phone a man by the name of Craig Tarbeck, and he says to me, "What is it you like to do?" And I told him, "Well, I'm mixed in with Lou Wise from the Fun Factory, and I kind of like to, start a mail order business and all this and that." So he says to me, "Okay, I think I have the instructions." He goes somewhere to some envelope and he finds the instructions for the original 1970s Ghost. And he says to me, which I never forget, he says, "Well, you know what? Let me see if you do come around and make it, maybe we can carry it in our catalog." I got really excited at that moment. Then he puts on a guy, and Dominic starts telling me how to, parts and where to buy them and, to make the. So Craig,
We weren't
me,
selling it any longer, right?
No, you weren't selling it. It had been already like 6-7 years that you weren't selling it, and you sent me a fax of the front of the instructions. So I said to you, "Is there a possibility I can get them?" You said, "Sure, I'll send them out to you tomorrow." Well, the telephone, hung up. Waited a day or 2, 3 days, nothing came. So I call back and I get Craig again, and Craig says, "You know what, Eddie? I was thinking after what I did and stuff. I don't know if the owner of Johnson Smith might be mad, because it is an item. So I think I'll just keep it for a record. And I think with the copy you have, you should be okay." But I didn't get the back part of the instructions, which is what I wanted. So I was like, what a bummer. Years went by, Craig, and that fateful day, those instructions didn't appear. It cost me a dearly buck. When I finally was able to get them on eBay, it cost me $900.
Oh
We
wow!
went into a
How did
bidding
you get 'em?
war. A bidding war between me and Kirk Damaris. Book Mail Order Mysteries. The book was written about my collection due to the fact that since he lost out to me, he needed to come up and see me so that he could see the item he lost. The time when we were bidding each other, it was interesting. He was teaching a class in his college, because I think he teaches in one of the colleges in and he had the computer there. He's trying to talk. He's trying to look at the auction at the same time, and the starting bid was $10.98. Here I am in my place up in Jersey, and I'm looking at the auction, and we're all looking. Of course, I have a way which I'm not going to disclose because it's a private way in which I know how to beat most people. In fact, and I went ahead and I won. But when I look at the price, man, it said $896 or $878. And all I could think was, oh my God, my wife is going to kill me. And at that time I said, Craig, I want to kill you. Send me the instructions. But anyway, I got the entire ghost, though. It was a mint condition ghost with the envelope, instructions, everything that came with it. Now, the other interesting part that one day, at that time I was a young kid and stuff. So Craig, you were the big boss and Johnson Smith and stuff. And when I bothered you and stuff, it was okay. It was just Eddie. Who's Eddie? A guy who likes novelties. So one day I go to Florida and I decide, you know what? I got to get together because it's been 20 years. I've sent this guy bottles and stuff, and I've always talked to him, but I've never met him. So I told my mom, I went to visit with my wife, and I got my father who had a van, and we drove 357 miles to have lunch with Craig. Now, Craig, if you remember and recall, you had gone through Johnson Smith and you had been up in the attic or somewhere trying to find those instructions that you had not sent me, including, I think, if I remember, the original artwork for the ghost.
Right.
And it was in vain because you told me you even broke your trousers. You remember that day?
Because of what?
You broke your trousers in the box.
I don't remember that.
You told, yeah, when you go look, I broke my pants. I was up there trying to really find it, but to no avail, I think.
Yeah,
and,
but obviously, we had discarded them much longer, quite a while before, I guess.
Well, when at the time you did have them still in Johnson Smith. When I called you in '85, Johnson Smith was already down in Bradenton Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
So apparently, like you said, they must have thrown out something in between A and B. I mean, it didn't matter because then not only did I also got a second set of the instructions. I forgot some guy in Las Vegas came to a pawn shop and he was able to buy it and he gave it to me. We made a trade. I gave him a 6-foot Dracula in full color and he gave me the instructions that, had the ghost and had an additional envelope. So what I did is I took that and I went to Michael's and I purchased a 24 by 48 plexi display case, not plexi, a glass display case, a shadow box. And I paid, I think it was $140, $160 and had Michael's professionally mount the ghost inside this huge display. And I've never opened it since. One day I'm going to do an unopening for the YouTube channel because I haven't looked at that for like 10, 15 years now. I haven't seen the original ghost. I have it there. In this picture in the center of Mail-Order Mysteries. And I remember when Kirk came by, all he was asking was, I need to see the ghost. I need to see the ghost. And I showed it to him. And he was there taking pictures of it like crazy. He couldn't believe that. And it was kind of funny. The reason I found out that Kirk had been the one that was bidding against me was that when the guy who sold me the ghost, he was going to send it to me. He an email and said, listen, there's a guy here who wants to pay, and he'll pay, I think it's $20 a clip of the photo of the ghost. And he goes, maybe you can make some of the money back. So I said, sure. You don't have to pay $20 for a picture. I'll do. And then he goes, Eddie, is this you? And that's when we found out we had been bidding against each other. And it wasn't a question, though, but I did get it. And you know what, Craig? Funny as it may sound, though, wish to this day that I would have had the original artwork for that ghost. That would have been so phenomenal.
Yeah, but you've done well with the ghost, haven't you, Eddie?
Yeah, I made my own version of it. I have a box version that you signed quite a few of them. I've sold, I still have because I only made a printing of 100. So I've sold most of the ones, the signed versions. I still have like maybe 15 left or 12. I sold about 4 or 5 of them. And you know what? To be honest with you, it's phenomenal. And it's probably the item that I treasure the most. The 7-foot Ghost is, in my opinion, the best mail order item ever made.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
sorry I couldn't make it easier for you, Eddie. But you didn't give up, that's for sure.
No, he doesn't give up. Eddie doesn't give up. That's true.
I thought what was phenomenal, and one of the things that, Craig, I think me and you got closer was when I told you it was with Lou Wise from the Fun Factory, that you told me that story that when you were up there, Lou had tried to hire you to come down from Michigan down to New Jersey to run the Fan Factory in the 1970s. Remember?
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I remember talking to Lou, and he recruited me. But I like Johnson Smith, and I didn't really think I was a New York kind of guy.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the most fascinating things also about that fact that Lou had given me the opportunity in 1993, I think it was 93, if you remember, Craig, that together we reopened the original Fun Factory, and I make my dream come true. And Lou had a full page ad run in DC Comics. So as we had spoken one time, Craig, Johnson Smith was the forerunner of all the mail order comic books because they ran in the 1938 Superman Action
Right.
#1. The Fun Factory under me and Lou ran the last comic book ad ever in 1993, 92, 93, the winter, where you can find it was actually the February issue or January issue that went in sale in December. And it shows like the Christmas theme on it. But
what
came out at
Eddie?
all DC Comics, quite a few. Anything
Still
that
DC?
Yeah. That
Yeah.
year had a full page ad, if you remember. I think I sent you a copy of one of the comics, but any comic book from 1993 December/January issue will have the full page ad for Fun Factory inside. I think I already gave him Todd, and I don't know if Joe has one or Chuck, but you can get them on the internet, you can get them on eBay. But the thing I could say is I hold that title as the last mail order comic book company that ran out there, which is exciting. And then later, of course, we became House of the Unusual. Now,
yeah,
Craig,
the demise of the comics was really a sad thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But there were no places anymore for kids to spend 10 cents like you did.
No.
When you were 5 years old. The drug. When I was a kid, by the way, I would go to the local drugstore and get my cherry Coke and buy a 10-cent comic book.
Right.
Those places where they could be sold, where kids would go, disappeared.
Yeah, they did. You're right.
Malls took over, and malls, they didn't want kids in their store.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no place for the comic books to be sold.
There was, the resurgence. There was, a lot of people, and I mentioned this several times, and maybe you guys can remember. I think, Chuck, you will probably remember. I think between 1981 and 84, you wouldn't see a comic book anywhere. The only thing I remember seeing were the Archie Digest that you would see in the supermarket, but you couldn't find comic books. In fact, right. I thought that at that time they had stopped printing them. But what happened in 1984-85, WWF, the wrestling world, started taking over by storm, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Craig, and you know this, Craig, because Johnson Smith started running ads in the rest. They started running ads, and then they started republishing Harvey Comics at the time, Casper and Richie Rich. And the deal with Harvey Comics was They were charging $700 or $750 for 3 or 6 months worth of ads. And
Right.
and Johnson Smith took the back cover. And I called up and I spoke with, Harvey Publications, and I was about ready to run an ad, and they told me at that moment that Johnson Smith was there, that I had to wait. I forget what the story was. But I noticed that I saw a Felix the Cat comic book. And I contacted that company and spoke with the grandson, which I don't remember his name right now. I do have his name somewhere because I remember writing down his information. The grandson of the guy who created Felix the Cat.
Wow. Cool.
And he was telling me, we're publishing now Felix the Cat. And I got all excited when I got my first ad ready, which I went to Office Depot, and some guy there in the graphic department with we're talking barbaric 1980s computer stuff, designed the ad for me. And when I was going to run it, well, apparently out of nowhere, being printed. They didn't print any more Felix the Cat. So what I did, my next thing was, how am I going to do this mail order novelty stuff if in reality, one, at that time now I split up. I was doing the House of the Unusual by myself. And what had happened is I couldn't afford the comic books because those were like $5,000 for 1 month. But what I could afford was wrestling magazines, which were published by a guy that was in Chinatown, New York City. And actually, it's funny because they published those 2 magazines, but the other magazines they published were in the X-rated kind of, I think. And I went actually to the company in person, met with the editor, and he decided, he said, hey, let's run. Because at that moment he was actually running. There was a company started in the wrestling magazines, which was Brad. And they had another company, and all of a sudden, all the companies, Craig, from the 1970s, the one that sold the Hercules wristband, the ones that sold the karate books, they all started coming out of the woodwork and advertising in wrestling magazines all throughout the entire country.
Is that
in
something?
fact, National Honor House, if you remember, Craig, at the end started selling those pellet firing pistols they used to sell. And
Right.
it became guaranteed distributors and continued selling. And what they started doing, they found a niche in the gun magazines, such as Guns and Ammo, the actual magazine named Guns, Soldier of Fortune. And they started running those pellet firing pistols for $4.95. And I think they kept doing that for the next 10, 15 years. Now, for me, I ran half-page ad in Wrestling Fury for the 7-foot ghost and a set of binoculars on the side. I ran a few ads, but what I found at the time was that what I would be making more money in it was by selling stuff in Popular Mechanics and Boys Life magazine.
You did that too, Eddie.
Yeah, well, in Boys Life magazine, which they kept running Johnson Smith ads and Funhouse ads. You remember Jack Abuff for the Funhouse?
Sure.
He's the one that published the 1001 Free Things.
Right.
Okay. Right? Did you ever?
I
speak
remember
with him?
Jack.
Okay. Jack Abuff, which, like right now, Craig, the honest truth is that I think you and Lou Wise are the last remaining people because Jack Abuff passed, Edwin Wagner from Honor House passed, Franco-American Novelties, Bob. Lou told me the story when I spoke with him last year or something that I think the wife found him, but he had a heart attack. He passed, and Bob Levy from Philo and Levy Advertising passed as well. Now, Bob Levy was the guy that started American Circle,
right,
which was very popular in comic books. With all the companies, Craig, all the companies that were out there, I could say this much. The thing that I was always looking for, and I know Joe's going to say, take a drink, these 7-foot robo plans that were sold.
Take a drink, everyone.
They were sold with the Monster Golds, with the Melting. The Melting Company obviously went under two names, the Melting Company and Guaranteed Distributors, which nothing to do with the Honor House Company, but they were similar. You know, they had the same name. And one thing that was kind of funny is Lou Weiss gives me, when we were in the Fun Factory, he gave me the original phone book from the company, original, you know, everything the company had, right? And one day I'm sitting down up and I'm there with Dave Harversat from SS Adams. And we're sitting in the car there. We're looking through the phone book. And we had met up there because the way I had worked it is when I had my magic, that now the internet comes around. I don't have to run ads in Popular Science and Mechanics, get the ad to come out. What happened now, Craig, is that the internet came out and I was able to have a website and, you know, start selling on eBay and all this stuff. And we're looking, I would sell in my website. I called, before I met Dave Harversat, I called Chris Adams because I used to purchase in 1989 from SS Adams. And I went there, and Chris Adams, the grandson of the Soren Adams, Soren, if I pronounce his name right, I don't even remember. He took me on an entire tour of the place. Dave came in, and what happened is that at that time I asked Chris, I said, "Hey, Chris, I need a catalog. Can I use the SS Adams catalog, change the cover on it, and, you know, make it House of the Unusual?" And he said, "Of course you can. Just and then he put me in contact with a company called Mackey Printers, which was right across the street. And they were the ones that used to publish the blogs. So Mackey Printer was nice enough to make me a version, like, you know, he said, "Yeah, we'll just put, you know, the same thing. We'll just change the name. We'll typeset House of the Unusual." And I was going ahead. So I did that, and that's the catalog I would send people. But when I had the website,
did you stock all that stuff, Eddie?
well, what happened is that Craig, Dave Harversat, when he purchased the company, or half of the company, and I got to be really good friends with him when I went back into the business, because between 1998 and 2000, I wasn't doing anything. Got me involved in again, and I said, "Well, what I'm cool, and I'm going to call SS Adams because I had an account with them and whatever." And that's when Chris Adams introduced me to Dave Harversat. And then what Dave would do is, whenever I sold an item, if I didn't have it, I would tell him, "Hey, Dave, can I meet you?" So he lived in Connecticut, but he used to have to drive 3 times down to the SS Adams Neptune store. And what we would do is we would rendezvous and meet in the middle. And he would give, now this way I didn't have to buy large stocks of merchandise. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's how I did it. But you know, going forward, to be honest with you, the mail order industry took a totally different form when the internet came around and when eBay came around. Mm-hmm. Because now all the stuff that I had no idea was going to be worth so much, started skyrocketing in prices. For example, when Honor House in 1985, they closed their doors, I think, in 84. I drove up there in 1985 and I met this guy who worked for them. I think his name was Ruben, if I remember correctly. He worked at the house. And when I went and tried to meet with Wagman, Wagman had told me to come back or send them a letter, and he make an appointment. This guy goes into the warehouse. When I came in the parking lot, I asked him, I said, "Hey, is there anything left in there?" And he goes, "Let me find out." So he goes in the back and he brings me 10 Frankensteins, the green ones, in mint condition, and 11 skeletons, Boney the skeletons.
Wow.
And gives them to me. I mean, who would have known that today they'd be selling for $500 a piece?
Yeah, who would think?
Right.
I think, Craig, my mistake was when the beginning of eBay and stuff back in 2000 and 2001. Mm-hmm. I think my biggest mistake was that I started selling those Frankensteins for $100, $200, and I sold like 10 of them. Now, here's the problem. The 10 that I sold, I sold 9 because I stayed with 2 of them. The 9 that I sold, one guy contacted me about, I don't know, 4 years ago. And he said, hey, Eddie, I want to ask you this question. I got this Frankenstein that I bought from somebody in Texas or whatever. Oh, I'm sorry, Las Vegas. And I think it was $245, whatever. He said, what do you think would be a good asking price if I try to sell it on eBay? And I said, look, the fact that the color Frankenstein and the color Dracula are more popular because they were original, it's one thing. They're popular. The green Frankenstein, because I think it reflects more the 1970s, higher value. I said to him, why don't you just put, for the heck of it, a starting bid of $425, a buy it now of $540? And he goes, okay. So I look at the auction. The next morning I get up and I go, what did you take down the auction? He goes, no, I sold it. I said, you sold it for $540?
Wow.
So then the thing that really threw me off is when I'm looking, I said, who did you buy that Frankenstein from? He tells me, and when I look at my old paperwork, because I keep and I'm looking through all the sales, I sold the guy the Frankenstein for $175 about 10 years ago. He sold it to this guy for $245, who in turn sold it to another guy for $504. So I'm saying to myself, how many of those Frankensteins out there were actually the ones that I kind of market with,
That's
but,
true.
Well, you're right, Eddie. The internet changed everything, and the latest change is Amazon, and Amazon has put a lot of people out of business, including Johnson Smith, who closed their doors in 2019.
Wow,
that is correct. That stuff. One thing I wanted to mention is kind of interesting because Caputo, he's the guy that's working on the cover for my new upcoming book, and he's also been a good friend for almost 20 years now. He's since he's an artist, he belongs to a lot of different forums, and one of the forums posted, and he calls me out on it, and he goes, Eddie, what do you think of this? And now the guy he was able to acquire an original 6-foot Dracula, the one. And he got an original one, and he also got the 6-foot Frankenstein. The thing that was interesting when I saw that, first of all, he did get the original Dracula, but the story with the Frankenstein, which Craig, I don't know if you might remember this or not, because remember how we spoke that the original company that sold the 7-foot Frankenstein and skeleton was Johnson Smith in 1970. Where it made 2 appearances in 2 different catalogs. And
yeah, I remember.
And apparently Honor House took it from there, exact word for word. And then they added the coupon that looks like a coffin. And then for the next 20 years, it was Honor House who sold them. But which is funny. But here's the story. The original company that made the 6-foot Dracula and Frankenstein was called the Lowell Toy Company, and they were located in Long Island. And then what happened later on, I think this was in 1963, the first ad, I think, or one of the first, to be exact, was in Warren Magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland, number 126, that the outer cover is The Outer Limits. Usually that magazine goes for about $160. Had a full-page ad for both monsters for only $1, the color Dracula and color Frankenstein. This is 1963, 62, if I'm correct. In 1966, 67, a company in Britain made a Frankenstein that's similar. The only thing, if you put the 2 of them together, you see is bigger in one than the other. So the knockoff, which is the one from Britain, since they didn't have the equipment to print like the other, got to like past the knee, that right before the ankle, they would actually print a separate section and they would glue it there. So it actually, instead of being one entire piece, it would be the top, and then it had a glue bottom section for the feet.
Wow.
It also has on the top and bottom a cardboard, and it has a string, making it look like those Chinese calendars that you get when you go to Chinese restaurants in the New Year's and stuff. It kind of looks like that now. That poster, when it first came out, was sold not in Famous Monsters. It was sold like in creepy, eerie magazines. They were sold in magazines that were mostly published by Warren Publications, which they probably published Elvira. And what happened, they would come with little spiders and caterpillars as a free incentive. Some people today take that poster and try to sell it off as the original old toy company.
Oh,
So
wow.
I told Calf, I hate to break the guy's heart. He goes out and spends hundreds of dollars to frame the set, the Frankenstein original set. He's got one of the reproductions. Yeah, they're still worth a couple of $100 to about 2 or 3, while the original is worth like $5. But the thing is that, and I praise Jesus for this, I was able to original box version of the Dracula and box version of the Frankenstein back in the late 90s or early 90s. And when I acquired it, okay, with the original box, that's the one that appears in the center of Mail Order Mysteries. You see the boxes there. Those are. And I had a guy offer me for the Dracula and the Frankenstein box, just the box alone, $2,000. And I said no. And then he stopped talking to me for a while. And finally, he got to talk to me again. But the thing is that I tell a lot of people that are listening that they have to be careful when you come, because this guy in his mind thinks he's got the two. I told him straightforward, you have the real Dracula.
Whoop.
Are you there?
I think we lost Eddie.
Yeah. Hey,
where'd you go, Eddie?
Chuck, Eddie, you there?
When you look at it side by side.
Hey, there he is. You cut off for a minute, Ed.
Yeah, I noticed that. No, I'm saying that the original, the English version and the original, when you put it by side, you would see the Lowell Toy Company is one has more vivid color. The other one, the colors are like washed off and kind of like not blurry, but you could see what's done where they kind of leaked into the paper. It's not a good copy. The head is bigger.
Right.
From far away, you might think it's the original. And I've seen people in Chiller Theater try to sell it off as the original for a couple of $100. In fact, in the 1990s, when Famous Monsters all filmed that, when I'm in 2000, when they started republishing that magazine, they found a company called the Monster Company or something, found in Europe an original box of those posters that had survived the fire. He found hundreds of them and then started selling them in Famous Monsters for $125 each. I was able to acquire about 4. So I do have 4 of those knockoffs. But I'm telling you, they're not, you can't compare the quality. You can't compare nothing.
No.
Hey, Chuck and Joe, I wonder if you would agree with me that we don't want to see Eddie ever grow up.
Never ever.
We got to keep Eddie going.
Oh, man.
He's a national treasure.
Yes.
He's like the ever ready bunny, man. He doesn't wind down. Oh, my goodness.
Let me tell you a story about Johnson Smith, which I think you'll find interesting.
Go ahead, Craig. We got about 2 minutes.
Oh, real quick. Johnson Smith, I believe, was the first company in America that put the whoopee cushion for sale. In fact, Alfred Johnson Smith wrote the great line, the whoopee cushion, that it gives forth better noises imagined than described. But, and it was a staple item. You had to have it. But in the 80s, we couldn't find it. I would call Franco-American. You remember them, Eddie, Bob Umano. I said, Bob, I need a couple hundred gross of whoopee cushions. He says, I can't get them to you. And I said, well, why not? Why don't you have any? He said, well, because of the AIDS scare, rubber is now going into condoms and not into whoopee cushions.
Wow.
We could not buy whoopee cushions because of AIDS.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Craig, it's funny. That's that Lou Weiss had mentioned to me that they found the poor guy in his basement. You know, he had a heart attack and passed. Very sad because he was a really. In fact, he was actually the first guy that gave me, before SS Adams, my first net 30 credit in my magic shop in 1989. So
yeah.
But anyway,
there's tons of cool stories, out there. I'm sure that we could spend the whole podcast on, but we're getting down to the last final minutes here, so we're gonna get just some final words from everyone here. We're gonna go around the table. Chuck, we'll start with you. Give us a final word from you.
Hey, all right. Hey, it was great. It was a great conversation. Craig, very nice to meet you, man. You know what? You did a great job all those years, and I could appreciate it. It was nice. It was nice finally to meet you. And Joe and Eddie, thanks for having me on, man. And I hope to talk to you guys soon. God bless.
Awesome.
And one thing I want to say really quick, I'm planning to get Craig and Lou Weiss on at the same time.
Cool.
Hopefully the weather will be better because I know Pennsylvania's having some bad weather. And that's why we're having such kind of like in the podcast here. But anyway, saying that, thank you, Craig. Thank you, everybody. And go ahead, Joe, take it over. And God bless. Right. Good night.
Craig, it's been an amazing conversation with you, and we really appreciate you coming on board and telling us, some stories of Johnson Smith. You got any final words for our listeners out there?
My pleasure. It's always fun talking to people who are as curious and as innovative and as you guys. You were my customers way back when. That's Chuck right. And Eddie, and right. I tried to do a good job for you, and I'm glad that I'm still talking to some of you guys.
Amen.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Eddie, you got any last words for us? Maybe give us an update on some of the magic items that are out for sale.
If it lets me and it gives me time, I'm doing a whole campaign in YouTube right now that's going out. We're going to continue to launch. As you guys know, the weather up here caused a little slight wrench in the plan of launching all the magic tricks that Chuck has produced. It's going forward, probably ASAP. I'm working on it. I don't want to give a timeline, but it's happening before probably the end of next week. In the process, I want to say thank you. And again, everybody, good night. And thanks. That's all I could say. God bless.
All right, awesome. And I want to give a special thanks to all of our listeners out there. And if you are enjoying this podcast and you are checking this out weekly, head over to your favorite platform. Subscribe to our podcast channel. Give us a nice 5-star review and maybe a written review if you so choose. That way, those special algorithms out there could get our podcast out to more people. Also, don't forget to head over to houseoftheunusual.com. We have a forum there, a blog. There's a link to the podcast and a bunch of other cool stuff, videos and whatnot. And you could just connect with some like-minded individuals and talk about your collection, maybe learn a little bit about, the history of these different companies, and also discuss maybe your favorite movies, toys, whatever. It's just a good time and a good place for people to get together and conversate and meet new people. Also, don't forget to check us out on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel, like our videos. We're going to be doing in the next coming weeks a big push on YouTube, getting more videos out there, some unboxings, some reviews of mail order novelties, and you never know what surprises are out there. So to all of our listeners all over the world, thank you for joining us, and we hope that you continue on with our journey and our conversations about the stuff that we love, and hopefully you'll enjoy it too. So Chuck, Craig, Eddie, thanks again for joining us. Everyone out there in podcast land, thank you and good night.